Some of you may not know what this event is, or how atrocious it was. An account of the madness and despair of George Trevor, as well as the horrid fate befalling his wife and daughter. So today, we're going to take a look at Resident Evil's most, at least to me, most disturbing experiment and event in the franchise. One that really leaves you with a sense of how twisted these antagonists really are. Bear with me, as I'm no scientist, and I'm going to be paraphrasing a lot here, but hopefully this gives everyone a little more insight into Investigaming Episode 3, The Trevor Incident. Now, first and foremost, I'd like to say that I appreciate you guys for waiting so long, because I know that I announced this almost 2 years ago, in October. But a lot of stuff has been going on since then, a lot of things have happened. There's going to be an update video talking about all that stuff, but now, let's get into this. George Trevor was a construction, possibly pseudo-engineering business, with the help of his longtime co-founder, the unnamed Chamberlain. Thus, the aptly named Trevor and Chamberlain Construction Company was hired by a man named Oswell E. Spencer. An aristocrat full of peculiar quirks and oddities, but a man of prestigious wealth and fortune. George was drawn by his fondness of gimmicks and non-standard engineering, and the general charisma Spencer had, going so far as to befriend George to a first-name basis, and eventually he was contacted by Spencer in 1962 to develop a mansion in the Arkley Mountains, a mansion that would serve as the tomb for him and his family. Upon completion of the manor in 1967, the Trevor family was invited to tour the estate and have a dinner with the client, Mr. Spencer himself. That said, things did not go as planned. George ate with Spencer alone, whom told George his family had left earlier to see his Aunt Emma, who was ill at the time. Unbeknownst to George, his wife and child were already being used as experiments for the vile and corrupt corporation Spencer held within his walls. Monday night, November 13th, was the dinner, and Tuesday, the 14th, was the official tour. During the tour, Spencer made clear his eventual goal of developing a pharmaceutical company. George remained there until the 18th, when he began to notice things were out of place or things were not supposed to exist, notably a space behind a waterfall. After finding this area, he was escorted away, noticing that men were following around the estate. The 20th, George lost his lighter and made known his intention of departure. George was knocked unconscious by Spencer and one of the men in lab coats that had been tailing him during his stay. During his now unwilling tenure at the manor, he remained for 3 days. Opting to escape, while wandering, he noticed, to his horror, one of his wife's shoes. Delirious from the drugs administered to him, and exhausted from running away from the guards for several days, just prior to his death, he'd unknowingly written the last words he'd ever write. "I've decided to escape. Lisa, Jessica, I pray you're safe." They were not. During the dinner George was having with the Earl of the mansion, Jessica and her 14-year-old daughter Lisa were subjected to horrendous experimentation and torturous conditions. Both Jessica and Lisa were administered the progenitor virus, varying samples to each unwitting subject. Lisa received the type A virus, showing no reaction to the virus. She was marked as a failed subject, eventually wrote a plan of escape, planning to give it to her daughter and allow the pair to escape the now horrific confines of their patriarch's design. Before Jessica could attempt to give Lisa the note, she was killed by what would be known as Umbrella, and her body disposed of in a coffin of stone deep under the estate. After that, a stand-in was used to try and fool Lisa into compliance. Lisa was given the Type B variant of the progenitor virus. A success. From that moment, her fate was sealed. Spencer subjected her to be his guinea pig for future virus research, deteriorating the poor girl's mental state and sense of self. Gradually, Lisa lost her humanity and sought only to be reunited with her mother, whom, unbeknownst to Lisa, was already encased in her stone prison. The stand-in for her mother was immediately compromised, as despite, or in light of, the newfound virus inhabiting her consciousness, she recognized the imposters, killing and disfiguring each one. She made a habit of stitching their faces together, creating a mask of the fake parents. Her continued survival of these otherwise lethal virus tests sparked the interest of a man named Albert Wesker, whom we all know has only the best intentions. Lisa survived. At the cost of her personality, humanity, and some would even say consciousness, or rather sense of self, she lived, running away, deteriorating into a husk of her former self. Eventually, even Wesker deemed her unfit for further testing. Sentencing her to death in 1995, she was subjected to this horror for nearly 30 years. By the time Wesker subjected her to a death sentence, she'd become a hunched monster, wearing shackles, chains adorned by a hospital gown, and a mask of victims. She stands quite tall despite her constant slouch and hunched form. I would say roughly probably between 6.5 to 7 feet tall if she stood tall. Her body mutated beyond recognition from the injections of the progenitor T-virus, and due to her brief involvement in Birkin, possibly prototypes of the G, Veronica, and Nemesis-type parasites and viruses, respectively. Having survived her initial death sentence, the guards found conventional weapons to have little or no effect on Lisa, her body too resilient now from the enhancement offered to her by continuous viral testing. Even explosive artillery had no long-lasting impact on her. Eventually, she escaped the clutches of the mansion, sheltering herself in a cabin on the grounds, waiting for her mother's return. 3 years later, in 1998, the STARS task force arrives at the Spencer mansion, and the events of Resident Evil 1 occur. During these events, we find Lisa still in her cabin. To dispatch Lisa, the team reveals her mother's corpse in the stone coffin nearby, causing her to throw herself from the platform in grief. Or alternatively, you can launch her into the abyss beneath with artillery. Either results in Barry, as long as you're playing as Jill, stating that he doesn't believe that thing is really dead. Astute observation. Throughout the game, you can find evidence of the Trevor's existence in the mansion, including George's lighter, notes and photos from the family. Each note left by Lisa shows her fear, her mentality slipping, and eventually the insanity she's left with after so long, not only in confinement, but after being subjected to the increasing potency of these awful experiments. On occasion, tentacles have been seen to sprout from her body, similar to the Las Plagas and Nemesis-type parasites. During the end of the mansion events in Resident Evil 1, Wesker sees Lisa during his escape, remarking that nobody is perfect, not even you, Lisa. Ironic, given his narcissistic standing in the subsequent games and media. Lisa chases Wesker throughout the events of Umbrella Chronicles and serves similar purpose to the Tyrant in Resident Evil 2 and Nemesis himself in Resident Evil 3, eventually succumbing to the explosion of the mansion at the end of the game. The experimentation and horrendous workings of the Resident Evil franchise have always been a nightmare for anyone if you dig down, because at the end of the day, it usually isn't the monsters that are the scariest part. It's usually the human element that makes these things all the more terrifying, especially given how few of the creatures actually have or had any say or control in what happened to them, not to mention the abundantly clear nature of Umbrella Corporation's true motives, the so-called advancement of mankind. Truthfully, it was all because Oswald Spencer feared death, so in order to try to avoid his own mortality, he cast his humanity to the wind, and began his spiral into insanity with a small family, and his own friend's daughter at that. That's crazy. Anyways, that will conclude Investigaming Episode 3. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and stick around during these little credit segments for a couple bits of trivia here. Like, for example, Lisa's actually on one of the stained glass windows of the mansion. Part of the way, Spencer gained the trust of the family to such a degree. Though she was injected with the NEA-type virus, her body was by then too hazardous for even it to remain, and thus it was absorbed into her body with no effect. Lisa Trevor was kidnapped at age 14 in 1967 and died officially on July 24, 1998, at least roughly 45 years of age. The Baker House from Resident Evil 7, or Resident Evil Biohazard depending on how you read it, was built by Trevor and Chamberlain, the very same company George co-owned. Dr. John Clemens announced her dead and had her body moved to an undisclosed location during her initial death sentencing. Clemens was known for his disdain of the company's inhumane and corrupt inner workings, so it's possible he falsified her death certificate during this time to intentionally free her of the torture of Umbrella. So things like that are kind of scattered throughout all the games. You can kind of find information about it here, but I hope this got you a little bit further into your understanding. But, all that said, this is just me investigating stuff, looking into things that I find interesting. So, thanks for watching.